And we're back. Miss Regala and Mr. Mercado are here for another episode of our soon to be famous podcast called paTOK.
The soon to be famous, we are back and maybe we will be on an extended state of soon to be.
Forgive us, it's the afternoon and
And
our
forgive us, we haven't done this in a month because,
in a while.
summer is for maximizing recuperation,
Mm-hmm.
your body,
Mm-hmm.
must rest again, your family
Yes.
want
And
your
and
attention back.
and part of resting is not using our brains. So here we are trying to dust away the cobwebs that have formed.
Exactly. Baka mahina yung muscle memory ng utak namin. So please bear with us as we buffer through this introduction. And I think that that's actually a great jumping point for what we're gonna talk about today. I mean, like, review muna tayo. Why are we
Okay.
here, Mr. Mercado? What do we do in
Apparently,
paTOK again?
apparently we're trying to make TOK a lot more accessible. We're trying to provide at least a more concrete way in how TOK ought to be applied. And TOK is not just a subject you learn from reading a book. Instead, it's a subject where you learn most by seeing how it works in the real world. So the paTOK series is a way for us to bridge that gap, to help you start looking at things and make things, and then you go, how does that work? How does that affect how I know? That's the that's the long-winded way of explaining what we are doing here in paTOK.
Thank you, Mr. Mercado, for that reviewed definition of paTOK, or at least the goals or ethos, DMO of this little
Oh,
video podcast that we have. And really, guys, we hope that last year, kahit onti yung engagement namin, na may nakakagamit pa rin dito sa gawa namin. And maybe this year, baka tumaas yun. And maybe some of our students will become more involved in this as well. The TOK and the IB community, teachers and students, and maybe even parents will as well. So we're still looking forward to that. But instead of looking forward to the year, baka we have to look back at what happened last year and the past summer.
definitely.
Diba?
Yeah.
Because summer was oddly long and short at the same time because time is weird
I know.
in a pandemic. Time is weird and incomprehensible. An experience in this pandemic. So let's talk about that. What did you do over the summer? Did you do anything new? Did you learn anything new? Did you like go back to something that you used to do or know before?
All right. For me, summer was pretty busy because I was teaching in the Ateneo for a few weeks. So our schedule was such a way that right after Xavier's school year ended, that's when I had to start teaching Ateneo. We were still doing it online, so it was pretty convenient, I guess. And then I became an examiner for the IB, and then I picked up my guitar again. I mean, I bought a new guitar, and decided to relearn how to play the guitar, because it's the last time I played the guitar was, when was that, 2017 or 2016, really really long time ago. And the only reason why I stopped playing the guitar was because the guitar broke. And because I was also broke financially, I couldn't afford a new guitar back then. But now that things have settled down a little, I can now afford. So I've been spending the last few months, maybe 3 months already, trying to play again. And I'm happy that my daughter is a big avid fan of my awkward transitions in between chords. How about you, Mr. Regala? What did you do in the summer?
Summer was actually oddly productive. I felt like it's the first summer that was actually summer like in a long time. Because usually, like, the summers are spent just, at least for me, waiting for in service.
Oh,
I mean,
you
honestly,
were
like,
waiting for work?
yeah, I know it's weird. And in I think it was last year or 2 years ago when I did examining for the IB. And this summer I tried as well. I qualified, but that kind of panned out in the middle of the process. Baka I was too stressed out. I wasn't in the disposition for it. So instead of thinking that not being to examine fully to the full extent was a bad thing. I just did a bit of reframing and realized that actually that means that I can have summer. Like suddenly the smile on my face grew and I did a few new things and returned to a few old things. Like, I mean, some of you might already know this. Mr. Bulosan and I started a fountain pen and stationery podcast. We're doing
Mm-hmm.
well in that. paTOK is a great influence to that because I would not have gotten the confidence to actually pursue something extracurricular. And oh my god, like it's making me so happy making that podcast with Mr. Bulosan.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that I went into or got back to certain creative endeavors. Like I realized that I enjoyed using my hands. Because I went to art school in high school, so
Mm-hmm.
I mean it was practically natural. I bound notebooks. I mean, I bound
Dami
notebooks over summer. Yeah, of course it's not focusing right now, but like if you need notebooks, I can make them. The other thing is, I've been when I was in art school, I used to make stamps. I used to make really big ones with the tools, but given that I graduated from high school and went into writing and teaching, I lost my tools. But I've managed to get the tools over break, so I've been making stamps.
Wow.
So I've been making stamps of things that I enjoy,
Yeah.
words that are relevant to me.
Well, we
Like
can't
that,
see the
yeah. It
photos.
says it's not gonna focus. It's
It's
not.
saying wow.
It says
Okay.
"wah," right? It says "wah." There's also what a flower.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like maximized summer. And the most recent thing that I tried to get back to, and you know this well, is that I tried to relearn how to learn how to ride a bike again. And that you can see it right now. That did not end well.
How come, Miss Regala? Where is the evidence of such an activity?
On
There
my
we go.
chin. On my chin. There's a big bruise on my chin. It is not a splotchy beard. It is just battle scars from
It's
my decisive
mm,
decision to relearn how to ride a bike. And after recording this, I'm actually gonna go out again just to, not get try my best to not get injured.
yeah, yeah. In fact, I think I would like to add one more thing that you learned over the summer or even over the past few months. Is
But
that you're now able to perform what we call the vlogger focus, where you now when you hold the item in front of the camera and then you put your hand behind it so that the
it's
item can be in focus.
not working. You have to cover your face for it to focus.
Or maybe it's the camera.
Maybe it's the camera. I got the camera, guys. Oh, the maximize. But anyway, okay.
Anyway.
So yes, I learned new things and I relearned or went back to a few old things. And that's like, ooh, this is relevant to today's topic.
Mm-mm.
What's our
yeah, I
topic?
mean, yeah, I mean, speaking of learning, there are perhaps things that we are grateful to have that we have accumulated with, like for example, information or skills that we accumulate over time. But perhaps it might also benefit us if we wonder, are there things, skills or knowledge or information that we wish we didn't learn? Or if there's a way for us to reverse the process of such a task where I think life would have been better off if we just didn't have that information or if we could just somehow forget such information.
Oh, sorry, I was typing up the show notes a while ago and I forgot. It's actually written in our script. May mga gusto ka bang malimutan? Sa dami ng natutunan mo at na-acquire mo over break, may mga
Mhm.
gusto ka bang malimutan? And it made it, I guess it's a relevant question to ask because we always think of knowledge as something that is acquired, diba?
Mhm.
Or transmitted, it's
Mhm.
spread, it's distributed, so
It's
on and so
collected
forth. Ayun,
or
it's
curated.
collected, curated. But is it ever something that you can lose? And this is maybe a relevant question to ask because when we were planning this episode, we were actually planning it end of March, end of April. We were
Mhm.
thinking about how to begin a school year again, right? And beginning a school year is really dependent on, well, your previous knowledge, right? The lessons that you have learned before, the habits that you had before, behaviors, rituals. everything that was familiar to you, everything that you remembered. And it begged the question, is it possible to reverse that process? Wala lang, napaisip lang talaga kami. We're messing with your minds. We're
And
messing with
and I think maybe to also emphasize that will reversing the process still lead to knowledge, or is the process of reversing such processes is the process of reversing such considered knowledge? So yung parang aside from the typical idea of knowledge as something that you gain or curate over time, can we still have knowledge if we lose things over time? Yon, di ba?
tumataas tayo kasi
Oh, di ba?
season 2 na. Tumataas.
Yes, it is.
Season
All
2.
right. So
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
go
Okay,
down.
key terms. Sige,
Mm-hmm.
start tayo sa key terms kasi alam na naman ng mga nakikinig or nanonood na we always start with a definition of terms. You've been hearing us saying it since kanina. The
Mm-hmm.
key term for today is learn. Learning, unlearning, relearning, any variation of it. But at the root of it, what is learning? What does it mean to learn? So, dictionary.
I mean that's a very challenging, I guess, definition to pin down, because there are many disciplines that also use the term learning. We have education, we have, in my case, psychology, and I think a common understanding, first of all, of learning is that you gain something new, you acquire, you collect, and this is often caused by experience. And we know that we've learned something if we can remember such new skills or new information and are able to apply it in an observable way, usually through behavior.
Psychology. But
Oh,
also,
diba?
you're giving me flashbacks to my edu classes with this teacher and that teacher. And it's always like, they always ask you that buzz question. Diba? Like, what is learning? And it's really that. Most of my co-teachers in that education class would say that it's about the acquisition or transmission or collection or distribution of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And then when your professor asks you, "Oh, Mr. Gala, what is knowledge?" It translates into, at least within the educational sense or scope sphere, it translates into skills or information.
Mm-hmm.
Diba? But it's actually not so easily just that, especially in the realm of the subject theory of knowledge, because we know that knowledge is not limited to skills and it's not limited
Mm-hmm.
to information. It's a justified true belief. So, theory complicated, our education professors intent in asking.
Yeah, so I guess we needed to talk about that, because when we say we learn something, what do we mean by that? Diba? I mean, I can say that I sat in a paTOK podcast and an episode. I watched it, and I can say that I gained a new experience, or gain a new perspective. Can I call that learning? And if I were to call that learning, then does that mean that if in my own mind something changed, is that enough to be called learning?
And was knowledge
Again,
acquired in that process.
yes, what was knowledge acquired in that process?
So, ayun siya. Madaming buzzwords, guys. But we're starting with that question. What does it mean to learn? We all know that in this community, or like practically everyone naman who's in
Education.
privileged enough to not have any problems mentally, physically, so on and so forth, diba? Everyone has the capacity to learn. And if you look at the dictionary, it's really this. Learning is gaining or acquiring knowledge of or skill in something by study, experience, or being taught. Another key definition provided by Google, thank you, is learning is when you commit something to memory. It is when you become aware of something by information or from observation. It is a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of
Mhm.
experience. That's new. That's very psychology. Mr. Mercado, we're going to go into that. And last, oh, yeah, those are the definitions that we've got here of Google. So, given these definitions, what's the relationship between learning and knowledge?
Mm. Parang yun nga, parang we're trying to figure out if we learned something, did we gain knowledge?
Oh, ang
Di
simple.
ba? You know yun? Joke.
Kasi yung
but
end
but
episode.
end episode. But then again, when it comes to TOK, sometimes things that are so intuitive might not be so if we spend a bit more time really thinking about the implications of such connection. So in this case, I think for one definition that you mentioned about learning that comes from psych actually is that it is relatively permanent change in behavior due to experience. And when we look at how the brain or how memory is created, um, we usually go through what we call a retrieval process and a storage. So a very common understanding of memory, which is again learning, is that we acquired and we placed somewhere in our brains that information. But what many people don't realize is that it's one thing to place information somewhere in our brains as storage. It's a completely different thing when we try to retrieve it. So we have actually theories, or it's still an ongoing debate as to what exactly is memory. Kasi is memory simply something like a storage? Because if it is a storage, if you look at our brains, nothing is static. Eh. There's no part of the brain that if you slice out, it's going to refer to a particular memory.
Oh,
Di ba? As and that's one parang school of thought that memory is something is akin to a storage. It's something that can be stored. And the other school of thought is that memories, or at least how we forget them, is that it's not so much that the mismong information was deleted somehow, but
mhm.
rather our access to that information has been deleted, preventing us from retrieving such information. So from a from a psych perspective, we're actually not so sure as to how and why we forget things, and if forgetting is equated to unlearning, then we're
Oh,
still in the blind. We're still finding more ways and how to explain such a phenomenon.
okay. So focus muna tayo. Well, I mean, I like that you're bringing up unlearning now, but like I
Okay,
want to
sige.
dwell right now a bit on the learning part. So what you're saying is that learning is acquiring,
Mhm.
right?
Acquiring and storage.
Acquiring and storing. Okay. So in that sense, kunwari, my nephew has recently, he's 6, he started to go to various free trial classes to occupy his summer. Para din yung nanay niya at kami nakakapagpahinga. So recently, he went to a coding class and he used Scratch Junior, or I think it's the Scratch program. So at that time, he was taught a certain information and certain skills that he stored. So he knows those information and skills already. Am I right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just like kind of concretizing the notion of learning. In that sense, he knows something. He knows that, okay, if you have this command, if you input this command, there will be this outcome.
Mm-mm.
Okay?
Mm-mm.
And once that knowledge is known, or that information is known, he can enact the skill.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you saying then about the connection, or what can be said about the connection between an action and what is known, or what is learned? Sorry, like learning, knowledge, action.
Mm-mm. For us, kasi at least from psych, the only way we can know if someone or an animal has learned a new skill is if they can demonstrate it. If there is no manifestation of such knowledge, then we are unsure as to whether or not they learned it, or whether or not they can't remember how to express the behavior we are expecting because of the learning.
Oh, so parang proof of learning and proof of
Yes.
knowing,
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
enactment.
Yes, at least for psych. I mean, at the moment, that's what we are able to measure objectively,
Mm.
and it's not like we can ask everyone all the time what they know, or what they learn. And to make things a bit more easy in terms of research, we have to rely on something that's a little more difficult to manipulate, and that is your behavior.
Ah, this sounds complicated, but it
It
also sounds
is.
very familiar because again, education classes is
Mm-mm.
the meat of it. I'm just really curious also about the other perspectives that are in place with regard to learning because honestly in art, I mean, again, as you've seen through my hobbies this summer, it's I don't think that I've undergone a process of active pursuit of knowledge. Like it's all passive stuff. Like today I woke up and I felt like I could um re I felt like today that I could make stamps again. So I just picked up my carving tool, I got my rubber block, and I started doing it. And it
Right,
was
right.
very intuitive to me. But and I didn't think na oh okay this is I didn't think back to my classes from before and all the theories that my art teacher told me na parang oh you should think about balance, you should think about the principles of design, you should think
Mm-mm.
about negative and positive space. I just really did it without thinking and things worked out. But come to think of it, your whole like spiel about how one learns and enacts learning still makes sense for my discipline. Na parang wala lang, natuwa ako. Ang galing nun. Ang galing. Education.
Ah,
It's like,
no
yes.
nga parang parang I guess in the process of thinking about the prompt about what can we is unlearning related to knowledge or can knowledge be gained by unlearning things. I think I am reminded of yung uh, the concept of paradigm shifts where when you're trying to explain a phenomenon and you're using what established theories or established methods or established ways of doing things, and it just somehow feels like the usual ways the usual ways of things are not as effective, and as a result we have to in a way start from scratch. We have to try another way, try a different technique, try a different method that would help us better understand such a phenomenon. And I think that's where the unlearning comes in, where you are deliberately sequestering the usual way of doing things. You are deliberately avoiding the usual steps of how to go about with things, and by deliberately not doing the usual things, you are pursuing something new and hoping that new process is able to help you address or observe the phenomenon better. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But I have to pause the recording. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So let me just get this straight. Parang what you're saying is that despite everything that psychology and our education professors say about the process of learning, sometimes active learning, so to speak, or the conventional understanding of it as a an acquisition and retrieval and enactment process doesn't really apply to all situations. So in my case, wherein I was making stamps, and I wasn't actively thinking about those steps or like yung mga theories that I was taught and the technicalities, I was essentially going through an unlearned process, a non-technical process that, how would you say it, that still led me to acquire and or produce knowledge and the product. Those being my stamps.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Ang galing ko parroting ba tawag doon?
Paraphrasing.
Paraphrasing.
I think that's a more romantic term than parroting.
Sorry. Parang edo class pala yung session natin today.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Okay. So, in that case, there's learning. There is also unconventional learning, what we will dub unlearning.
Mm-mm.
But, like, say, because we've already established that learning is related to knowledge acquisition, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
it also possible to lose knowledge?
That one I'm a little unsure of.
Okay lang.
Because at least from a psych perspective, whatever information we gain, whatever insights we acquire, it usually is stored in long-term memory, And we don't know what really happens in long-term memory. We don't know how and when information decays. We don't really know if the decay is because the information itself evaporated or our access to such information has been because of misuse. It's just no longer there. So when it comes to knowledge, when we unlearn things, do we also lose knowledge? I think from a psych perspective, the answer is no. It's just there. The knowledge is just there. We just have a hard time accessing it.
Oh. So
But
I
then
still
again,
possess the knowledge that
mm-mm,
like 13-year-old Jika had about art theory.
mm-mm,
But right now, because of, say, what I prioritize in life, what I prioritize to do and think about in life, some things that I think disappear are actually not disappeared. They're not gone. The things that I know aren't gone. They're just inaccessible.
yeah, at least from our perspective, that if 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 you did not suffer any head trauma, if you did any head injury that would, have affected a part of your brain that holds that information, then most likely it's just access to the information that we lost. Parang ano siya, parang there's this theory na, or at least a metaphor where a path that's well walked on is pretty clear. But
Yeah.
the less people walk on a path, the less the path is clear. The more that the environment eats up that path. So if we haven't been accessing that information or accessing that skill, it's quite possible that it's still there. Okay, the script, the steps are still there, but there's just no path anymore that leads us to that that script or to that set of activities.
Okay. This is very enlightening because again, I spent the summer not thinking. I spent the summer not thinking. I spent it just doing to the point that I got thrown off my bike because I didn't think about the repercussions of going
Mm-mm.
downhill and not knowing how to brake. So there we are. But this gives rise kasi to a question. We were actually talking about this a while ago when we were spending lunch together with Mr. Yato, and we brought about our talk, right? About like when you learn something, you acquire knowledge, and then you enact that knowledge into an action, or if you do it often enough, it becomes a manifestation of your behavior, so on and so forth. Diba? We also talked about, yun nga, can you unlearn something? Like reverse the process. And we just said right now that no, it's just that you don't have access to the knowledge that you once had because you haven't been using it. You haven't been using the path that you tread toward that knowledge. Which begs the question, from his perspective, Mr. Yapko brought it up. What about muscle memory? Like in the first place, when you do something repetitively, you acquire something, right? Like that's what K-pop dancers do. That's what K-pop do. Like for example, or like T-pop and like total SB19 fan, when they had like I think their concert, they practiced their dance 1,000 times. They had like a count every day. You have to practice it 20 times today, and then until you get to 1,000. First, my question then is learning there, is learning present in that process, and is knowledge acquisition present in the process wherein you're just moving your body repetitively to keep that motion. Like is that knowledge, is that a justified true belief? But it's a skill that you're getting.
Yeah,
So I'm like,
yeah.
what's your opinion on it?
Kasi ano, maybe what I forgot to mention was that when we talk about long-term memory, about information being stored, we are referring to what we call declarative information or declarative memories. These are the things that you know of or what you know. And there's another kind of memory that we refer to as procedural memory, of more of how you know how to do things. So riding a bike, that's procedural memory, whereas describing what a bike is, that's declarative memory. So whatever you can express through verbally or through words, that's what we call declarative. as compared to
Mhm.
things that you have to do in order to demonstrate. That those are what we call declarative. So when it comes to dancing, perhaps, and then learning the moves, yes, I think at least from a psych perspective, there is still learning that occurred. There is still procedural memory that was created and stored and retrieved later on. But as to if procedural memory can be related to knowledge, that I'm not so sure, because if we are defining knowledge, it almost sounds like it is declarative memory, something that you can say, express, use into words, and then put into an essay and maybe hopefully get an A out of. But when it
Mhm.
comes to procedural memories or procedural activities, we usually refer to it as skills, and even in education we separate skills from quote unquote knowledge, KS.
Oo nga, knowledge and
Diba?
skill magkahiwalay. Okay, I'm gonna mess with this. I'm gonna mess with
Go
this.
na.
You
Go na.
notice I've been messing with our entire discussion naman. When we were teaching the new curriculum of TOK last year, knowledge was actually, it's great that you say declarative and procedural right now, but if you look at our textbook, it says that knowledge, there are three types or three manifestations of knowledge. There's knowledge of something, yung declarative that you were talking about, knowledge of how to do something, which is procedural, and then the third one is knowledge based on experience. So oddly enough, you've got these three parang categories of knowledge, and then you've got the umbrella definition of it as a justified true belief. Personally, right now, and my students will hate me for this, I just find it difficult to bridge the gap between a justified true belief for a particular procedure. And I mean, obviously, I will not have the answer right now, because right now
Mm-hmm.
I do have a problem with it. But I think it's something that also has to be brought up. That if you're a student and you're listening to it, your teachers also don't have that answer so clearly. We know in a sense that indeed it can be considered knowledge because the book says so. Diba? An authority, an
Yeah.
objective and authoritative
A
authority.
paid authority.
Grabe. Okay.
Purchase authority.
Yeah. Has said that it is. But personally speaking, and I like critical argumentation, I still am not fully convinced, or I still haven't found a way to connect the two. Like I don't know how to justify a belief in a procedure, right? Because I know
Yeah,
how
it
to,
is complicated.
diba? I can justify a statement, a declaration to be true, diba? But I'm
Mm-hmm.
having difficulty justifying a procedure to be true unless that procedure suddenly become declarative.
I mean, for example, if you're going to go to sports and if you can claim that you can curve the ball in football,
Yeah.
when you kick the ball, it curves. The only way for you to justify such a belief to be true is if when you kick the ball, it does curve. But then again, if it only curves once, does that mean that you actually know it, or was it a fluke?
Yeah.
Parang how many times do you have to curve the ball to tell people or to finally say that your belief that you can curve a ball is actually true?
Yeah. And from what area of knowledge's perspective should you justify? Right, like right now when you're talking about that football kicking process, diba? A
Mm-mm.
skill, that a learned skill. You were actually talking about it from the sense of both scientific observation,
Mm-hmm.
repeatability, and of course mathematical statistics.
Yes,
But
yes.
from say my perspective, art, from art, I'm like,
Oh, it curves. Yay.
oh, diba? Like, in my perspective, and we're going to say it na parang it's that metaphor of the blind man describing an elephant, right? Touching different parts of the elephant because you can't see what I see. And if I see it more often than you do, that the ball curves whenever I kick it, then we come up with another dilemma. The justifications are variable. The learning process. Oh, and this is why it's so complicated to talk about learning. I'm feeling ko nga medyo makala tayo today, but it is what it is.
Is what it is.
Learning is what it is. Point being, when you learn something, you acquire knowledge. That knowledge can be an information a skill,
A skill.
a skill, or something else. Okay. And well, you have to justify it repeatedly by enacting, okay, or by manifesting, exhibiting that information or that skill repeatedly over the course of time. And muscle memory factors into this because Mr. Yapko was talking about like how do you call it? He was asking the question, can your muscles forget a memory? Can your muscles
Well, a psych perspective would say that muscles don't have memories.
oh sorry,
it's
sorry.
only
Yeah.
it's only the brain that has memories. You there are neural pathways that the
Mm-hmm.
more that you exhibit the behavior, the stronger the pathways become. So therefore, making it a lot that much easier to perform such a task. So muscle memory is, at least from a psych perspective, is nothing more than just neurons that are fired together have now wired together. So it's a lot easier to remember what to do next without having to think about the steps one by one. So
Oh.
yes, muscles don't have memories, but maybe that's just to refer to procedural memory, where you just know how to do things without necessarily being conscious that you're doing them.
Okay, I waxed poetic. That was poetic language. I'm sorry. Okay, so we tend to neglect the use of muscle memory because again, yeah, we don't think about memory in the
no
conventional
one no
logic.
one does. I mean, the only time we think about memories is when we forget. when
Oh,
we when we forget information at the most inconvenient times, like where are the keys, or, or where did I leave my charger? Yung mga ganun.
where are my glasses? And I'm
Where are my
actually
glasses?
wearing it. Or
Mhm.
where's my phone? And I'm actually using it. Oh,
Holding it, yes.
oh yeah. Okay, this is so familiar. But yeah, how do you call this? Yeah, learning. um,
Okay na yun?
okay na to. Joke lang, hindi, guys. Let's just synthesize a few things here because we wanted to just start off the school year. We're still buffering. We bet you are too. But we want to, how do you call it, bring to the surface the issues or the things that, again, we don't look at, right? We've essentially spent the last year talking about various events or like various topics in relation to events, but we haven't actually looked at the very premise of why we are here because we are teachers and students learn from us. But it's also possible that we can shift that perspective or add another way of looking at it, that we're part of a community that learns from each other. We are a community of
Of
knowers
learners.
and learners. Sorry. So, hindi yung school. We are not affiliated. We are not sitting here. But yeah, we are a community of learners. And maybe it's also time in 2021. Okay, I don't know if this is our new BMO for 2021. Maybe it's time that we look at the process of learning and its relationship with knowledge acquisition, retention, retrieval, and
Yes.
enactment. O, di ba? Meron akong outline, meron akong PowerPoint. Sana mapanindigan natin to by the end of the year.
Sure, sure.
But just as we don't focus on our breathing, thank you, mindfulness. Just as we don't focus or pay attention to our breathing and the way that our bodies work, we don't focus on learning. But maybe if we shift our perspective to focus on that as well, we'll be more mindful as teachers and our students will be more mindful as well as learners. So
Mm-mm.
that's my thesis. Ikaw, ano yung point mo dito? Ano yung
I guess ano lang, we just need to have a bit more flexible definition of learning.
mm,
Na sometimes when we deliberately not use the information given to us, and it happens to arrive at favorable results, I still think that that's valuable. That learning still occurred. And maybe the temptation right now is that since everything is done online, there's hardly any physical interaction. There's no non-verbal cues to let us teachers know that students are learning. Perhaps we can be a little more generous with how we interpret silence, with how we interpret non-submissions, because perhaps be learning technically exactly all the things that we're trying to deliver to them or disseminate to them. But I think they are still learning a lot about how to cope, how to survive this very uncertain environment, and how, despite the many limitations at home, they're still able to commit, they're still able to submit. So yun lang, parang I think learning has to go beyond what students can repeat or what students can recall, but perhaps we can also look at how learning is really encompassing how their habits have been changing, how their perspectives have changed, and how we are all trying to survive, and we're just doing our best in making the most out of a bad situation.
Ganda nun.
Naman.
Good job. Ganda nun. In essence, final synthesis. Final synthesis! Okay, is this. I forgot. Joke.
Oh, cut that out.
Cut that out. I'm sorry. But in essence, let's be more compassionate this year. I mean, we were already compassionate last year. Diba? But there's never a time na hindi naman siya magagamit kasi alam naman natin yung ginagawa natin. Wow, this is a call to our teacher, to all teachers. And for students na rin to, guys, we're telling you right now that we are mindful of your situations and that we are opening ourselves up to the notion that just because you don't learn necessarily what we intend you to learn in the way that we intended it doesn't mean that you did not end up knowing something. So this is also a cry to empower yourselves, committing teachers nyo. We've been working through the summer and through the in-service season in May, empowering ourselves to open ourselves up to unconventional learning. So unlearning as well. And unlearning literally sometimes, getting out of our old habits and our old perceptions and our old preconceived notions. So good job.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good year.
It'll be a good year. So thank you for listening to our first episode of paTOK. A little out there, but I think that's just how we start things. Don't worry, things will be a lot more focused as we go through the school year, and we're hoping to hear from you again, hear from you more, in fact, as we engage in ever deeper questions about how we know what we know.
Yeah, these questions are gonna get worse from here on out. And that's a
Challenging.
good thing.
All right. See ya.
See you guys and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.